One night, while I slept, one of my own sons struck me on the head with a cast-iron pan. As the blood ran down my face, my father smiled. The boys I had poured my love into had become my tormentors, twisted by the very man who should have been my protector. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my dear friends, wherever you may be. My name is Margaret Rowland Hayes, but most people around here just call me Grandma Maggie. I am 74 years old, though I like to say 74 years young, because every day I wake up still curious about life, still thankful to see the sun rise. So if you're watching, baby, go ahead and like this video, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's story. 'Cause this ain't just my story, it's the story of too many women who had to smile through the silence. I live now in the quiet border town of Fairhaven, North Dakota, just a stone's throw from the Canadian line. It's a place where the Red River winds gently through wheat fields, where the air feels crisp even in summer, and where neighbors still call out each other's names when they pass in town. My days begin early. I brew coffee in the old enamel pot I've had for decades. Then I sit on the porch and listen to the sparrows as the horizon blushes pink. Behind my little house, I keep a modest garden. Rows of sage, thyme, chives, and peppers I tend with care. Some say I have a green thumb, though I think it's just patience and love. My husband, Earl, a retired music teacher with kind gray eyes, likes to tease me. Without you, Maggie, this house wouldn't be a home, it would just be four walls and silence. His words warm me, not just because they're sweet, but because they remind me that respect and tenderness still exist in this world. These days, life feels steady, peaceful, even joyful. On Sundays, my two daughters visit with their husbands, and the house fills with the chatter of my 5 grandchildren. I cook for them like my mother once cooked for me, slow-roasted beef with vegetables, cornbread fresh from the oven, or sometimes fried chicken that makes the little ones lick their fingers. And of course, dessert. Apple pie with pecans, because in this part of the Midwest, no Sunday is complete without pie. Those moments, my daughter's hugs, the laughter of children running across the yard, Earl humming an old hymn while washing dishes. These moments remind me why I fought so hard to still be alive. Because believe me, my friends, there was a time when I thought I would not survive. I'll never forget the night one of my own children lifted a cast-iron pan and brought it down toward my head as I slept. The pain was sharp, the blood warm on my face, but what seared me deeper than the wound itself was the sight of my father, my own father, standing in the doorway, smiling as if justice had been served. The boys I had raised with lullabies and prayers, the boys I nursed through fevers and carried on my hip, had been turned into strangers. And worse, into tormentors. They believed the lies whispered into their ears by the man who should have protected me, the man who once taught me that respect was the cornerstone of family. You see, my father was not always that way. And I was not always this scarred woman you see today. To understand how I arrived at this moment of peace in Fairhaven, you must walk with me back through time to the dusty roads of Clearbrook, Kansas, where I was born in the summer of 1951. Clearbrook was nothing more than a speck on the map in those days, a cluster of weather-worn houses, a church with a white steeple, and a general store that carried everything from nails to penny candy. Life there was simple but rich in the things that truly mattered. My father, Harold Rowland, was a tall man with broad shoulders and hands calloused from his work as a surveyor. My mother, Eleanor, taught at the little one-room schoolhouse. She was tiny in frame but mighty in determination, with a voice that could soothe or command with equal strength. Our house was built of wood, painted white with green shutters, and it had a porch that wrapped around the front. In summer, We hung hammocks and watched fireflies dance in the dusk. In winter, we huddled near the wood stove, while snow piled up against the windows. Behind the house stood an old apple tree that bore fruit so heavy its branches bent low. There were chickens pecking in the yard, and a scruffy dog named Bandit who never let a stranger near. I was the eldest of 3 children. My brother Walter, 2 years younger, was always tumbling into trouble, and my baby sister Clara came along when I was nearly 9. Every morning began with the rooster crowing. My father often left before sunrise for work assignments that kept him gone for days. My mother would rouse us, spoon steaming oatmeal into bowls, and walk with us to school, sometimes carrying Clara when she was too small to keep up. At school, I saw my mother transform into Mrs. Rowland, a woman everyone respected. She taught reading, math, and geography to children of all ages in a single room, never once losing her patience. I watched her with awe and told myself, someday, I'll be a teacher like her. In our household, respect wasn't just a word, it was law. My parents never raised voices at each other, never humiliated one another in front of us. Decisions were made together, behind closed doors, and when they returned, harmony always followed. My father used to say, "Respect is the roof over a home. Without it, everything crumbles in the storm." That was how we were raised. Walter, though a boy, had no special privileges. He scrubbed his own clothes, cooked simple meals, and helped mother in the kitchen. My father insisted, "A man who cannot care for himself will never be strong enough to care for others." At the same time, Mother taught me and Clara how to fix broken things, how to handle tools, and how to stand our ground. Weak women exist only in the minds of weak men, she'd remind us. Our lives were not wealthy in dollars, but we were rich in dignity. Festivals in Clearbrook were magical. On the 4th of July, we strung flags from every porch, roasted corn on open fires, and drank cider from steaming mugs in the winter festivals. My favorite memory is of wearing my gingham dress with ribbons in my braids, dancing in the town square under lantern light. Looking back now, I realize my childhood was a golden season. And yet, even as a girl, I noticed things in other households that unsettled me. There were families where screams broke the night, where women appeared with bruises and explained them away with shaky excuses. There were girls my age promised to men twice their years. I remember whispering prayers that I would never live such a fate. I believed then that the values my parents gave me, mutual respect, shared work, love without violence, would protect me forever. How little I knew that one day, those very values would be tested in ways I could never have imagined. My friends, today you see me as a grandmother with laughter in her home, herbs in her garden, and peace at last in her heart. But there was a time, decades ago, when everything I believed about family shattered. The respect I learned in childhood turned into submission demanded by a husband. The father who once told me women and men were equals became the man who convinced my sons that I was unworthy of dignity. And the children I carried in my womb, the very ones I nurtured, became my judges and tormentors. That story is not easy to tell, but it is mine, and it is true. And in sharing it, I hope someone watching today finds the courage to rise from their own pain. In the next part, I'll take you back to the young girl I once was, the dreamer who believed in love and a bright future. Because it was there, in that innocence, that my journey truly began. When I think back on the fields of Clearbrook, Kansas, my heart still stirs with memories of sunlit afternoons and nights filled with crickets' songs. Childhood, for me, was not about having many material things we didn't. But it was rich in values that stitched themselves into my soul and never left me, even in the darkest of times. Clearbrook wasn't much more than a cluster of homes along the dusty banks of the Little Arkansas River. A place where everyone knew your name, where the storekeeper noticed if you were out of sugar and the preacher could recite every family's story from memory. It was a community where people survived harsh winters and dry summers by leaning on one another. Our house stood at the edge of town. A simple two-story farmhouse painted white, its porch wrapped all the way around. Mother filled the windowsills with jars of marigolds and lavender, and Father built a swing that hung from the thickest branch of the apple tree out back. Chickens strutted around like they owned the yard, and our mutt, Bandit, chased them in endless circles until they flapped their wings in protest. We didn't have luxuries, but what we had was a home, a place full of warmth, discipline, and laughter. Our days began before the sun. The rooster crowed, and Mother's soft voice carried down the hall. Up you get, Maggie. The world doesn't wait. She served oatmeal with honey or cornbread leftovers from the night before. Walter, my brother, was always groggy, rubbing sleep from his eyes, while Clara, the youngest, giggled at everything, even at her own messy braids. Once breakfast was done, we walked 20 minutes to school. Mother was not only our mother, she was the teacher. That meant the classroom was both her domain and her stage. I loved watching her stand at the chalkboard, her small frame commanding a room full of children, her voice patient, but firm. She taught us all subjects in one room. Spelling lessons for the littlest ones, arithmetic for the older children, and geography for the middle grades. Somehow, she made it all flow, weaving learning like a quilt where each piece fit together. I sat straighter every time she called on me, determined to make her proud. Even then, I dreamed of standing in front of a class myself one day, chalk in hand, helping a child unlock the mystery of words or numbers. You were born with a teacher's gift, she told me more than once. Those words became my secret compass. My father, Harold, was a man of discipline, but never cruelty. His voice carried weight without ever needing to shout. He'd come home from surveying land, his boots caked in dust, and sit us down for what he called Rowland lessons. Respect is the roof over a family, he'd say, his rough hands clasped on the table. Without it, storms will tear the walls down. He believed in equality in ways unusual for men of his generation. Walter was never excused from chores just because he was a boy. He learned to cook scrambled eggs and scrub clothes in the wash basin, just as I did. And Clara, though small, was taught to hammer nails and patch fences. A weak woman only exists in a weak man's imagination, my mother used to say, and Father agreed. They were a team, and they modeled what it meant to be partners. Decisions were made together, and when disagreements came, they handled them quietly, out of our sight, returning with calm answers instead of arguments. I thought that was how every household worked. It wasn't until later that I realized our home was an exception, not the rule. Despite our modest means, joy was abundant. Summers smelled of fresh-cut hay, winters of wood smoke. In the evenings, we chased fireflies with jars, our laughter echoing across the fields. Walter and I built forts out of hay bales, and Clara toddled behind us, insisting she was big enough to join. Festivals were the heartbeat of Clearbrook. The 4th of July meant parades with horse-drawn wagons and flags waving from every porch. Women sold pies on folding tables, apple, cherry, rhubarb, and men roasted corn in great iron pots. In autumn, we had harvest dances lit by lanterns, where fiddles played into the night and people stomped their boots on wooden floors until dust rose like fog. I wore my gingham dress with ribbons in my hair and felt like a princess when boys asked me to dance. Not because I cared about the boys, but because it meant I was part of something bigger, the rhythm of community, the joy of belonging. Still, even in those golden days, shadows lurked at the edges of my awareness. There were houses where arguments shattered the night, voices carried on the wind, and sometimes the sight of a woman with bruised cheeks explained away as a fall down the stairs. I overheard older girls whisper about being promised to men twice their age. Their eyes carried a sadness I couldn't quite name then, but one that made me clutch the values of my own family even tighter. I remember praying in my small bed, "Lord, let my life be different. Let me marry for love. Let respect always live in my home." I didn't know then that my prayers would be both answered and twisted in ways I could never foresee. By the time I turned 12, I was already helping mother at school. I sat with the youngest children, guiding their hands as they traced letters, teaching them to sound out words. Their eyes lit up with each success, and I felt the thrill of watching knowledge take root. At night, I sketched plans in my mind of a future. I would become a teacher, just like mother. I would have a home filled with children, yes, but a home built on equality, like my parents had shown me. I believed those dreams were as solid as the wooden beams of our house. If someone had told that braided girl in her gingham dress what storms awaited her, the love that would turn to chains, the father who would become a stranger, the children who would raise their hands against her, I would not have believed it. But life has a way of breaking the very things we think are unbreakable. When I turned 17, the winds of change began to blow into Clearbrook. A road project was bringing in new workers, men from outside towns. Among them was the man who would change my life forever, Thomas Hayes. He arrived in the fall of 1968, tall and broad-shouldered, his confidence filling every space he walked into. And when his eyes met mine in the general store, it was as if the ground beneath me shifted. But that part of the story, how love found me, and how it later betrayed me, belongs to the next chapter. It was the autumn of 1968 when my life first changed course. I was 17 then, with ribbons in my hair and dreams as wide as the Kansas sky. The Clearbrook General Store was where everyone gathered on Saturday afternoons, and that was where I first saw him, Thomas Hayes. He had just arrived from Wichita, brought in to help on the new highway project that promised to connect our sleepy town to the state capital. He was older than me, 24, with a strong frame, sun-darkened skin, and a confidence that made everyone turn their heads. He carried himself like someone who knew where he was going, and when his eyes met mine, I felt as though the floor had shifted beneath me. He tipped his hat and said, "Afternoon, miss." Just 2 words, but they echoed in my head for days. After that, it seemed Thomas appeared everywhere, on the church steps after Sunday service, at the farmers' market on Wednesdays, even near the schoolyard when I walked home with my brother and sister. Always with that smile that sent my heart racing. It didn't take long before Thomas asked my father for permission to court me. I remember the day as clearly as if it were yesterday. He stood on our porch, hat in hand, his voice steady. "Mr. Rowland, I have good intentions with your daughter. I may not own much yet, but I'm a hard-working man, and I'd like the chance to prove myself." My father studied him for a long moment, then answered, "Thomas, my daughter's opinion is what matters most. If she wishes to see you, I will not stand in her way. But understand this, respect is the foundation of this family. If you can't honor that, you have no place here." My mother later pulled me aside, her eyes searching mine. "Maggie, listen to your heart, but don't forget to use your head. Love is patient, not hurried. A good man will wait." I nodded, but inside I was already swept away. I was eager to begin my own love story, eager to build a home of my own. Thomas knew how to charm not just me, but my entire family. He brought father a pouch of fine tobacco, gifted mother a length of patterned fabric she later sewed into an apron, and gave small toys to Walter and Clara. He walked me home from church, carried buckets when he saw me drawing water, and spoke of building a house for us with his own 2 hands. "We'll have a family, Maggie," he whispered once as we stood beneath the apple tree in our yard. "A big one. You'll be the happiest woman in Kansas." I believed him. On a June afternoon in 1969, at the Little White Church in Clearbrook, I became Mrs. Margaret Hayes. I had just turned 18. My wedding dress was sewn by Mother and Mrs. Lawson, the town seamstress, white lace stitched with tiny embroidered flowers. The air smelled of orange blossoms, and old Mr. Peters strummed his guitar as I walked down the aisle. When Father placed my hand in Thomas's, he whispered, "Build a home of respect, daughter. That's all I ask." I thought I was stepping into a fairy tale. My heart was full, my dreams alive. We moved to a small wooden house in Lexington, Kansas, where Thomas had found steady work on Interstate 70. Those first months were a dream. He came home each evening with dirt on his boots, but a flower in his hand. We ate simple suppers by lantern light, and he told me stories about his childhood in Wichita, about the roads he wanted to help build, about the future we would shape together. It wasn't long before our family began to grow. In 1970, I gave birth to our first child, Daniel. Holding that tiny boy in my arms, I felt a love so fierce it stole my breath. Thomas was proud. He handed out cigars at work, boasting, "My boy, my son." 2 years later came our first daughter, Emily, and then the children seemed to follow one after another: Matthew in 1973, Aaron in 1975, the twins, David and Paul, in 1977, Sarah in 1979, and then the youngest, Rachel and Peter, in the early 80s. 10 children in total, 8 boys and 2 girls, just as Thomas always dreamed. Our house overflowed with noise, diapers, laughter, and endless laundry. I breastfed each child, washed cloth diapers by hand, stayed awake through fevers and midnight cries. Thomas worked hard and provided, and though money was never abundant, we never went hungry. Those were exhausting years, but my heart was full. I believed I was building the very home my parents had raised me to dream of, one with love at its core. But over time, subtle changes began to surface. At first, they were so small I hardly noticed. A complaint about dinner not being seasoned enough. A sharp tone when I left the laundry out too long. A question about why I spent so much time chatting with the neighbor lady. I told myself it was nothing. Every couple bickered. He worked hard, after all, and maybe he was just tired. But then came the first broken plate. The first slammed fist against the table. The first time his voice rose not with affection, but with anger. Respect begins with a wife knowing her place, he told me one night when I dared to question his decision. The words cut me deeply. I had been raised to believe respect was equality, a partnership. But to Thomas, respect meant obedience. And slowly, I began to shrink. As the years passed, Thomas's temper grew sharper. The children saw it, the slammed doors, the scowls when the house was noisy, the way he dismissed my words as if they carried no weight. My daughters, Emily and Sarah, would look at me with wide eyes, already sensing something was wrong. My sons, still small then, mimicked his tone, repeating phrases they overheard, phrases that made my heart ache. I tried to remind him of the promise we made, the family we wanted to build. "Thomas, we said we'd be different. Like my parents, built on respect." His answer chilled me. Your mother raised you wrong. A woman has no business speaking as an equal. Respect starts with obedience. It was then I realized our definitions of love were not the same. For me, love was a bond of equals. For him, love was control. The girl who once dreamed under the apple tree in Clearbrook was slowly becoming a shadow in her own home. And though I didn't know it then, this was only the beginning of a storm that would test me in ways I could never have imagined. By 1983, our home in Lexington was bursting with life. 10 children filled every corner, their voices rising like birdsong in the mornings and echoing down the hallways at night. Thomas worked long hours on the interstate project, and I spent my days trying to keep some sense of order in a house overflowing with little feet, hand-me-down clothes, and pots of stew that never seemed large enough. Life was not easy, but it was steady. I thought the storm clouds that hovered over our marriage, the arguments, the raised voice, the controlling hand, were simply the price of having a large family. I told myself that love, even bruised and weary, was still love. But fate has a way of tearing away the illusions we build for ourselves. It was a Tuesday in late spring when the news came. I was kneading bread in the kitchen, the radio humming low, when I heard a knock at the door. 2 men stood there, faces solemn, hats in hand. Mrs. Hayes, one began, his voice heavy, there's been an accident at the work site. A steel cable snapped during bridge construction. Thomas didn't survive. The world tilted. My knees gave out, and I gripped the counter to keep from falling. Their words rang in my ears, but they didn't make sense. Thomas was strong, unshakable. How could he be gone in an instant? The children crowded around, their faces pale with shock. Daniel, our firstborn at 12, clenched his fists and swore, I'll take care of everyone now, Mama. I'll be the man of the house. The younger ones wept without fully understanding, their small hands tugging at my dress, searching for comfort I didn't have to give. That night, after the children fell asleep in a heap of tears and exhaustion, I sat alone by the cold stove. I expected grief to crush me, but what came instead was a strange, guilty relief. Relief that the shouting had ended. Relief that I no longer had to brace myself for another slammed fist or sharp word. And then came shame. What kind of wife feels relief at her husband's death? I buried that feeling deep, but it gnawed at me. As if one loss wasn't enough, tragedy struck again only 2 weeks later. A telegram arrived from Clearbrook. My mother, Eleanor, had collapsed suddenly in her kitchen while preparing supper. By the time neighbors found her, it was too late. I traveled back to my hometown for the funeral, leaving the children with neighbors. Seeing my mother laid out in her Sunday dress, her hands folded around a rosary, was like losing the anchor of my life. She had been my teacher, my guide, the one who always reminded me of my worth. At the graveside, my father, Harold, looked like a ghost of himself. His once strong shoulders slumped, his eyes vacant. He clutched my hands and whispered, Maggie, I don't know how to live without her. 50 years together, what am I now? I hugged him tightly, my own heart breaking. At that moment, I made a decision. Come live with me in Lexington, Daddy. We'll take care of each other. The children will love having their grandfather near. You shouldn't be alone. I thought I was saving him. I didn't realize I was inviting the storm into my home. It was a gray afternoon in March when Father arrived, stepping off the bus with a battered leather suitcase in one hand and a burlap sack in the other. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by grief. His hair, once thick and dark, had thinned to white. His hands trembled as I embraced him. You'll be safe here, Daddy, I whispered. We'll make a new beginning together. At first, I tried to restore some joy to his days. I set his rocking chair on the porch where he could watch the children play. I cooked his favorite meals, chicken and dumplings, biscuits with honey, hoping a taste of the past would lift his spirits. For brief moments, it worked. I remember one evening when little Rachel, only 2 years old, climbed into his lap with a rag doll. For the first time since Mother's death, I saw a glimmer of the old Harold in his eyes. He chuckled softly, bouncing her on his knee. For that fleeting moment, I thought maybe we'd be all right. But as weeks turned into months, his grief twisted into something darker. He grew restless at night, pacing the floors, muttering as though carrying on conversations with my late mother. Sometimes he'd call her name, his voice cracking with desperation. "Eleanor, don't leave me. I'm coming, I'm coming." Other times, he turned harsh, snapping at the children for laughing too loudly or scolding me for leaving the light on too long. His mood swung like a pendulum, tender one moment, furious the next. I took him to see Dr. Mitchell, a kind man in town. After a quiet examination, he pulled me aside. "Mrs. Hayes, your father is suffering from depression and what may be the beginnings of dementia. He needs rest, medication, perhaps even counseling." I left the clinic clutching a prescription bottle that cost nearly half the money I earned from sewing and baking. I gave it to Father faithfully, but he refused to take it. "Pills are for weak men," he grumbled, spitting them into the trash when he thought I wasn't looking. At first, I dismissed his bitterness as the ramblings of grief. But then I noticed subtle changes in my sons. Daniel, my eldest, no longer answered me with the same tenderness. His tone grew curt, his eyes hard. Matthew followed suit, imitating his older brother. One afternoon, as I walked toward the backyard, I overheard voices. My father sat beneath the apple tree. My older boys gathered around him like students at a lesson. His voice was low but sharp, every word cutting. "Your mother was never kind to your father. She shamed him, nagged him, made his life unbearable. That's why he was distracted that day. That's why he died." I froze in my tracks, my blood turning to ice. None of it was true. Thomas had belittled me, controlled me, raised his hand against me, but Father was rewriting the story, painting me as the villain. Daniel's voice answered, uncertain at first, "But Mama, she's always been good to us." Father's reply was swift. "A woman can fool her children, but she cannot fool her husband. Remember this, a man must rule his home, or he is no man at all." My heart splintered. I wanted to scream, to rush forward and tear the lies apart. But something stopped me. A gnawing fear that confronting him would only deepen his conviction and drive my sons further away. That night, when I asked Daniel why he had spoken so coldly to me, his eyes narrowed in a way that reminded me of Thomas. "You know what you did, Mama. Grandpa told us everything. You made Dad miserable." I tried to reason with him, explaining that his grandfather was confused, sick with grief. But Daniel's answer cut like a knife. "Don't talk bad about Grandpa. He's the only one telling us the truth." From that point on, the air in our home began to thicken with hostility. The older boys pulled away from me, answering back with contempt, muttering about obedience and respect, not the kind of respect my parents taught me, but the kind my father now twisted into submission. Only my daughters, Emily and Sarah, clung to me, whispering their fears late at night. Even little Rachel sensed something was wrong. She'd ask, "Mama, why are the boys mad at you? Why does Grandpa look so angry?" I had no answers that a child could understand. How could I explain that the man who once taught me dignity had become the very hand pulling my family apart? I still remember sitting at the kitchen table one evening, watching Father's face in the lamplight. His eyes, once warm and full of wisdom, now looked cold, shadowed by bitterness. At that moment, I realized that the man I had invited into my home was no longer the father I once knew, and the seeds he planted in my sons' hearts were only beginning to grow. The change didn't come overnight. It crept in quietly, like a slow-moving shadow across the floor, until one day the whole room was dark. My sons, my babies whom I had rocked through colicky nights and carried on my back while stirring pots of stew, no longer looked at me with love. They looked at me with something else. Distrust, contempt, anger that wasn't theirs but borrowed, planted deep by their grandfather. It began with the way they answered me. Daniel, once my tender-hearted firstborn, snapped when I asked him to help with the younger children. "That's not my job. You've got plenty of work to do, Mama. Do it yourself." His words stung, but his tone, so sharp, so final, hurt worse. Matthew followed his lead, then Aaron. By the end of that year, even Paul and David, the twins who used to cling to me like vines on a fence, joined their brothers in glaring at me as though I were the enemy. Only my girls, Emily and Sarah, stayed by my side. They whispered their fears to me at night, asked why their brothers had changed, why Grandpa spoke so cruelly. I had no easy answers for them. "Your grandfather isn't well," I told them. "His heart broke when Grandma died, and now he sees the world twisted." But even as I said the words, I knew it was more than grief. It was bitterness poisoning him, and through him, poisoning my sons. It was late one evening in 1987. I was stirring beans on the stove when I felt a sudden, sharp pain between my shoulder blades. I turned, and there stood Aaron, just 16, his hand still raised. He had struck me. The room spun. "Why?" I whispered, clutching the counter. His voice was cold. "Grandpa says you don't respect the men in this house. It's time you learned your place." Those weren't my son's words. They were heralds spilling out of a boy too young to even grow a full beard. My father's doctrine of control, dressed up as wisdom, had now passed into another generation. I cried that night, not for the bruise blossoming on my back, but for the unbearable knowledge that my own children were slipping away from me, replaced by angry echoes of my father. But the darkest night came not long after. I woke to the sound of footsteps in my room. My heart hammered as I saw Matthew, 14 at the time, standing over me, his hands clutching a cast-iron skillet. "Grandpa says you don't deserve to sleep when there's work left undone," he muttered, his eyes glazed with something between fear and rage. Instinct took over. I rolled off the bed just as he swung. The skillet crashed into the pillow where my head had been a moment earlier, splitting the wooden frame beneath. My body shook with terror as I scrambled into the bathroom, locking the door while Matthew pounded once against it before retreating. I slid to the cold floor, sobbing silently, not for the near miss with death, but for the unbearable truth: my own son had tried to kill me. By then, Emily was 17 and Sarah just 13. They were the only light in my collapsing world. They tended to me after each insult, each shove, each bruise. One evening, I returned from selling bread at the market to find the boys surrounding me in the kitchen. Daniel grabbed my arm so tightly it left purple fingerprints. "You'll learn respect tonight," he hissed. Behind him, the twins grinned nervously, caught between fear and excitement. I begged them, "You are my sons. I carried you. I loved you. Please don't do this." But my words fell like stones into a bottomless pit. Then came Emily's voice, sharp and steady, "Leave her alone." She pushed through the circle, planting herself between me and her brothers. Sarah followed, trembling but brave, her small body pressed against mine. "She's our mother," Emily shouted, tears streaking her cheeks. "If you hurt her, you'll have to go through us." For a moment, silence filled the room. My boys shifted uneasily, their bravado cracking under the courage of their sisters. But then I saw him, my father, leaning in the doorway, his cane in hand, his lips curled into a satisfied smile. "That's it, boys," he said, his voice dripping with approval. "Keep her in line. That's how a real household is run." I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't just my children I was losing, it was the very man who once taught me respect, now unrecognizable, his wisdom replaced by venom. That night, when the house finally quieted, I lay in my bed trembling. My daughters slipped into the room. Emily pressed a cool cloth against my swollen arm. Sarah held my hand tightly. "Mama," Emily whispered, "if we stay here, they'll kill you. One day, they'll really do it. We can't let that happen." Her words pierced me with truth. I had been clinging to hope that my sons would see reason, that my father would return to the man I once knew. But hope was no longer enough. The line between discipline and destruction had been crossed. That night, I prayed harder than I ever had. I prayed for strength, for a way out, for a chance to save my girls and maybe, just maybe, to save myself. And as I drifted into a restless sleep, I dreamed of my mother, Eleanor. She sat at the foot of my bed, her presence so vivid I could smell the lavender soap she used. "Daughter," she said gently, "you were not raised to bow to cruelty. You were raised to fight for what is right. Remember who you are." When I woke, the dawn light spilling through the curtains, I knew I had to act. Not tomorrow, not someday. Now. The hardest truth of all settled on me that morning. I could not save everyone. My older boys were already lost in my father's grip, their young minds twisted by his bitterness. But Emily and Sarah still looked at me with love. The younger children wavered, confused, caught between two worlds. I realized with a weight like lead pressing my chest, I might have to leave some of them behind. It was unthinkable, unbearable. Yet the alternative was worse: to stay, to die at the hands of the family I had nurtured, and to let my daughters grow into women crushed by the same cycle. As I stirred porridge that morning, my body bruised, but my mind clearer than it had been in years, I whispered to myself, "It ends here. One way or another, it ends here." The decision had been made. I would not wait for another blow, another skillet in the night. I would find a way out for myself, for my daughters, and for any of the little ones still young enough to be saved. But how does a woman with no money, 10 children, and a broken spirit escape a prison built inside her own home? That question would consume my every waking thought in the days to come. And soon, I would find my answer in a desperate, risky plan, one that involved secrecy, betrayal, and a handful of sleeping pills. Sleep became a stranger to me after that night with the skillet. Even when exhaustion pulled at my bones, fear jolted me awake with every creak of the floorboards. I would lie in bed, my daughters breathing softly beside me, and wonder if tonight would be the night my sons, or worse, my father, finally carried through with their threats. I knew one thing: if I didn't act, my girls and I would not survive. But how could I leave? 10 children. No money to my name. A father who watched my every move. Sons who questioned my every word. The thought of abandoning any of my children tore at me, but the thought of staying was worse. So, with trembling hands and a heart that felt half-broken, I began to plan. I started by hiding away every penny I could. When I sold bread or pies at the market, I tucked a coin or two aside before handing the rest to the boys. When I mended clothes for neighbors, I slipped the bills into a small wooden box hidden under a loose floorboard in my room. Over months, the box grew heavier, not much, but enough to buy train tickets or rent a room somewhere far from Lexington. I guarded it as though it were my lifeline. And in truth, it was. At the Saturday market, I often saw Frank Dalton, a man who once worked with Thomas on the road crews. He was older now, with a limp from an old war injury, but his eyes were steady and kind. Frank had always treated me with respect, even when Thomas barked orders or belittled me in front of others. That spring morning, with Emily watching the stall, and Sarah arranging loaves in neat rows, I took a deep breath and walked over to Frank's stand. He smiled when he saw me. "Mrs. Hayes. Been a while. How are you holding up?" The words nearly undid me. No one had asked me that in years, not with sincerity, not with care. My throat tightened, and before I could stop myself, tears welled in my eyes. I lowered my voice. "Frank, I need your help. It's a matter of life and death." He studied me for a long moment, then motioned for me to follow him behind his stall, away from curious ears. There, with my hands shaking, I told him everything. About my father's decline, his lies, the way my sons had turned on me. About the skillet, the bruises hidden beneath my sleeves, the nights of terror. About my desperate need to escape. Frank's face hardened as he listened. When I finished, he laid a weathered hand on my shoulder. "Maggie, I knew Thomas. He wasn't an easy man, but you deserved better than this. You're doing the right thing." He leaned closer. "I've got connections, men who don't ask questions, but know how to keep folks safe. And I've got a cousin up in Fairhaven, North Dakota, near the border. Quiet town. He can help you get settled." The name struck me like a bell. Fairhaven. A place I had never seen but already longed for. But getting there was another matter. I couldn't just walk out with my daughters, not with my father and sons watching my every step. That night, while the house slept, I remembered the little brown bottle of sleeping pills I'd once been prescribed after Thomas's death. I had tucked it away, unused. Now I held it in my hand like a forbidden key. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Mix just enough of the medicine into the family's meal to make them sleep deeply for several hours, long enough for me, Emily, and Sarah to slip away. I hated myself for even considering it. I loved my children. Even those who hated me, even those who struck me, I loved them still. The thought of harming them filled me with dread. But I told myself this wasn't harmful. This was survival. The next day, I prepared dinner, as always beef stew, their favorite. While chopping onions, I whispered prayers under my breath, my tears falling into the broth. When the pot bubbled on the stove, I poured the medicine into the jug of apple cider I usually served with meals. I measured carefully, enough to send them into deep sleep, but not enough to endanger them. Emily entered the kitchen quietly. She saw my shaking hands and whispered, "Mama, is it tonight?" I nodded. "Yes. Tonight we leave." I warned both her and Sarah not to touch the cider. Drink water. No matter what, drink water. Dinner was like any other. Father sat at the head of the table, silent and watchful. The boys shoveled stew into their mouths, gulping cider to wash it down. Only my girls and I drank water, forcing smiles when the boys teased us about it. Half an hour later, yawns began. David rubbed his eyes, muttering about needing a nap. Paul laid his head on the table. One by one, the boys drifted into slumber, their anger silenced at last. Even Father resisted for a while, his eyes narrowing as though he sensed something amiss. But eventually, his lids grew heavy, and he slumped back in his chair, snoring softly. The house fell into a strange, fragile silence. "Now," I whispered. Emily grabbed the bundle of clothes and documents we had hidden in the closet. Sarah clutched my hand so tightly it hurt. Together, we slipped out the back door into the cool night air. My heart pounded as we walked quickly down the dirt path toward the meeting place Frank had arranged. Every shadow felt like a threat, every rustle like the echo of pursuit. And then we saw it, Frank's old truck parked beneath the sycamore tree, its headlights dimmed. He stepped out, his face etched with urgency. "You're safe now," he said, helping us into the cab. As we drove away, the lights of Lexington fading behind us, I looked back one last time. My children slept in that house, unaware that their mother was leaving them. My father sat slumped in his chair, lost to a darkness I could no longer fight. Tears blurred my vision, but I kept my eyes forward. For Emily. For Sarah. For myself. That night, in a borrowed bed at Frank's sister's house, I lay awake listening to my daughters breathe. Relief flooded me, but so did grief. I had left behind half my family. Would they understand one day? Or would they only remember me as the mother who abandoned them? I didn't know. All I knew was that the cycle of pain had to end. And in Fairhaven, North Dakota, I would begin again. The road from Lexington to Fairhaven stretched long and uncertain, but every mile carried me further from fear. When Frank's truck finally rumbled into that little town by the Red River, I felt something stir inside me that I hadn't felt in years: hope. Fairhaven wasn't big. A handful of streets lined with clapboard houses, a town square where children played, and a white-steepled church that rang its bell every Sunday. Yet to me, it felt like a new world. The air was crisp, the river shimmered in the sunlight, and the silence was peaceful, not threatening. We rented a single room at the back of a boarding house, the three of us packed tightly together, but safe. The money I had saved, along with Frank's quiet generosity, was enough to cover the first few months. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Emily, just turned 18, found work at a small fabric shop downtown. Her hands, always nimble, stitched hems and folded cloth until her boss praised her as the best worker he'd ever had. Sarah went back to school, her notebooks filling quickly with doodles and poems. For the first time, her eyes sparkled with curiosity instead of fear. And I did what I had always known how to do: I cooked. I set up a little stand at the bus depot, selling potato pies, cornbread, and jars of jam. Travelers came and went, but they always paused for something warm from my stall. The coins gingled in my apron pocket, and though it wasn't much, it felt like freedom. It was at that same bus depot that I met Earl Henderson. He stepped off a worn bus one chilly morning, a guitar slung over his back, a small suitcase in hand. His hair was already silvering, his frame tall but gentle, his eyes carrying the calm of a man who had weathered storms. He bought a potato pie, then lingered to talk. He told me he was a retired music teacher, visiting a nephew in Fairhaven, but thinking of staying for good. There was a softness in his voice that immediately disarmed me. The next week, he returned. And the next. Always with a kind word, never with impatience or judgment. When he learned I was widowed and raising 2 daughters alone, he offered to give Sarah free guitar lessons. "Music saved me when I lost my wife," he explained quietly. "Maybe it can help your girl too." And so he became a presence in our lives. He never crossed lines, never pressed too hard. He carried groceries when he saw me struggling, listened when Emily spoke about her dreams, and treated Sarah as if she were his own. One night, as we washed dishes, Emily nudged me with a knowing smile. "Mama, that man likes you. Really likes you." I blushed like a schoolgirl, embarrassed at 39. Nonsense. He's just kind. But deep down, I knew she was right. 2 years later, Earl asked me to marry him. He did it the way my father once taught me men should, with dignity and respect. "Maggie," he said, taking my hands, "I know you carry scars. I won't rush you. I just want the chance to build something gentle with you. Something rooted in respect." We were married in a simple ceremony at the Fairhaven church. Just me, my girls, Earl, and a handful of friends. There were no fancy gowns, no elaborate feasts, just laughter, music, and a promise that this union would be different from the one I had fled. With Earl's savings and my market earnings, we bought a modest house with a porch that looked out onto the river. I planted sage and thyme in the backyard, while Earl filled the evenings with music from his guitar. For the first time in decades, my home felt safe. Emily married a kind local man and gave me 3 grandchildren who now fill my weekends with laughter. Sarah grew into a gifted teacher, her love for music nurtured by Earl's patient lessons. I never forgot the children I left behind. News reached me in fragments: Daniel moving to Oklahoma, the twins working in the mines of Wyoming, the younger boys scattering to different towns. My father, Harold, passed away in 1994, his mind never returning from the shadows. I grieved them all in my own quiet way. Even those who hurt me, even those who raised their hands against me, I grieved them because they were mine. But I also understood something I once could not. Sometimes saving yourself means letting go of those you cannot save. Now, at 74, I sit on my porch in Fairhaven, the river glinting under the sun, Earl humming softly beside me. My herbs grow strong in the garden. My grandchildren chase fireflies just as I once did. The scars of the past remain, but they no longer define me. Instead, they remind me of what I survived. My wrinkles are not shameful. They are maps of survival. My scars are not defeated. They are proof of resistance. And my story is not a tragedy. It is rebirth. To you, my dear friend who is listening now, if you are living in fear, if you are trapped by the people who should love you most, know this: there is always a way forward. It will not be easy. It will cost you more than you think you can bear. But your dignity, your safety, and your life are worth more than staying in the shadows of abuse. Ask for help. Seek allies. Don't be ashamed. Somewhere out there is a Frank, an Earl, a safe place where you can breathe again. And remember this: surviving is resistance. Thriving is victory. I share my story not to dwell on pain, but to show that no matter how broken you feel, life can be rebuilt on new soil. I was a woman who nearly lost everything, yet here I sit, a grandmother, a wife, a woman at peace. If my story touched your heart, share it. Someone you know may be waiting for a sign, for proof that escape is possible. Leave a comment below with the word reborn so I'll know you walked with me to the very end. Because this is what I've learned in my 74 years. Even after the darkest night, dawn always comes. And with it, the chance to begin again. I have carried these memories for most of my life, silent, heavy, tucked away in the corners of my heart. For years, I believed my pain was too ugly to share, my scars too shameful to reveal. But silence, I've learned, does not heal wounds. Telling the truth does. I share this story not to relive the hurt, but to show you that even in the darkest valleys, light can be found. I was a woman broken by betrayal, bruised by those who should have loved me most. Yet I chose life. I chose dignity. I chose to rise. To every soul listening tonight, if you are caught in shadows, if you wake each day with fear pressing against your chest, know this: you are not alone, and you are not powerless. There is always a door, a hand willing to reach for yours, a future waiting to be rebuilt. My scars are my testimony. My wrinkles are my wisdom. And my story is my gift, to remind you that survival is not the end of the road, but the beginning of rebirth. If my journey has touched your heart, I ask one thing: don't let it end with you. Like this video, share it with someone who may need these words, and subscribe so we can keep telling stories that matter. Because sometimes, the truth we speak can save a life. My name is Margaret Rowland Hayes. Once I was silent. But today I am free. And I am leaving you with this truth. No matter how long the night, morning always comes.